Okay, I'll be honest with you guys. I kind of forgot that I said I was going to put together a video of an example presentation. So I remembered today and figured I would get that out to you as soon as possible. So what I'm going to go through is a example presentation on the process of distillation. This is an example of what you might turn in to me for your presentation, but obviously with a different separation technique. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my presentation and show you how the presentation meets each of these different pieces of criteria present in the rubric. Okay, so my first slide here is just some introductory information about my separation technique. I'm not going to read all of this, obviously, but it's probably good to have an introduction slide, not mandatory, right, because it's not in the rubric, but just giving your audience a brief overview of your separation technique, the history behind it, that sort of thing, what it's used for generically, might be a good idea. Okay, and then we get into some actual stuff that's on the rubric. So, distillation exploits differences in boiling points of the substances involved. The boiling point of a substance is a physical property. Okay? So this right here, these two sentences check this first box here, or this first circle. Identify the physical and or chemical property exploited in that separation technique. So I've identified the physical property, its boiling point, and I've mentioned that it is a physical property. So for your all's presentations, most of the techniques, it's either a physical or a chemical property. There are a couple that can kind of have both, but just keep in mind, right, you have to tell me which one of these it is, and then what is the property itself, right? So not only did I say that it's a physical property, but which physical property, its boiling points, that enables distillation to work. Okay, my next slide talks about how it works. Okay, just a paragraph here of how distillation works, how the process works. This checks this second box here. Explain how those properties are exploited to achieve separations of mixtures. So the properties need to be, like the physical or chemical properties that are used in your technique should be referenced in your explanation of how it works. Okay, and you can see how I have done here. Substances with lower boiling points are easily boiled. As the liquid mixture is heated, these substances boil first and are able to be captured, blah, 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 blah. The substances with higher boiling points remain liquid in the original chamber. Okay, so I've referenced the specific physical property in my case that in my explanation of how this works. Okay. All right. Then we get to the real-world application and the model. So I have a real-world application here of Kentucky bourbon, okay, which relies pretty heavily on the process of distillation. I've got a little brief description of sort of how bourbon is made. And then I've got my hand-drawn diagram. So I did draw this diagram. It's not perfect. In fact, on here I didn't really label any parts that specifically pertained to like bourbon, production, but I did sort of describe how my diagram would relate to the process of bourbon distillation, right? So ethanol, the alcohol produced during fermentation of barley mash, has a lower boiling point than water. In this example, ethanol would be the blue substance with a low boiling point, and water would be the green substance with the high boiling point. Okay, and so then this is just a diagram that gives you an idea of how the process works, right? The low boiling point substance boils first, travels as a gas to a condenser, and then it turns into a liquid in that condenser and can be channeled into a different container as a pure substance, okay, effectively separating the mixture. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Now, you'll notice that there is one other important one here, well, two more important parts of the rubric here. Organizing your information well, using bulleted lists, tables, diagrams as appropriate. I don't really have any bulleted lists or tables in my presentation, but I do have plenty of diagrams. And it says as appropriate, so it's not like you need all of these things. Essentially what I'm looking for is just to have your information organized well. It's kind of hard to, pin the tail on the donkey there, exactly what that is, but I've got my different slides very well differentiated into the different parts of the rubric, right? Like this is talking about the physical property, this is telling me how it works, here's my real world application, and then here's my diagram, right? And then lastly, citing sources. Okay, so this is a step that I skipped, okay, mainly because I know all this information, okay, so like I didn't really have to cite any sources other than perhaps the pictures that I used. I've omitted doing that, but then again, I'm not actually turning in a presentation. So really what I would like you guys to do is just practice citing your sources. It's okay if it's not perfect, but it definitely needs to be more than just a link to a website, okay? So there's plenty of different places on the internet that can help you with citing sources. I just want to make sure that, we're not getting caught up in any sort of like plagiarism issues, right? So with that being said, here is the actual rubric itself. So you can see these 5 big categories here, right? Identifying the physical property, the explanation of how it works, the real-world technique, the model, and organizing information. You'll notice that there is no category on here for the citations. Basically, if you don't cite your sources, I'm not going to grade your presentation, okay? So I'll just hand it back to your group, and you guys need to finish citing your sources before I'm even going to take a look at it, okay? So you'll get a grade 5 through 1 in these 5 different categories, and then I'll average those out to give you your overall grade for the presentation, okay? You can get a 4 and a 2. I don't have those exact categories here in each of these, but if I feel like you're somewhere in between a 5 and a 3, for example, in any of these categories, I can give you a 4. Okay, so that's it. Once again, if you guys have any questions about anything, please feel free to shoot me an email before your presentation is due, and I will see you next time.